Dear students, in order to actually explain to you a little bit more about how to formulate your research question and also how to use your pedagogic framework in order to gain a critical perspective in your research project, I have prepared this little video with a PowerPoint attached to it to help you with these issues. And here you see a rough draft produced by one of our students in our research unit, where he actually put all the things he wanted to talk about together without actually having a clear structure yet in this paragraph. But he put enough there for me to use the questions that I've sent to you before, which I use as prompts, helping me to develop a research question. And these are questions like, what do you want to talk about? What would you like to identify? What would you like to discuss? And why are you doing this study? So by trying to answer these little prompts, in order to answer these little prompts, I actually looked into his paragraph, and in color I have highlighted the things that were important for our research question. So by looking at his questions, I found out he wants to talk about the role of the school principal in managing change, and then he talks about making good things happen in school, but I tried to word it in a way to give him focus, and I thought, well, what's the ultimate purpose of a school principal? Not just to make the school work, but mainly for the school to be a quality teaching and learning environment. So here we are. We have now 3 elements, in fact 4, but let's talk about the first 3 that are already apparent in his paragraph. He wants to talk about the role of a school principal in managing change, and all of this in order to help school to produce a quality environment in teaching and learning. So, as you can see here, I have repeated those important key aspects of our students' question, and now I have put them also, I have organized them in terms of these questions I plan to identify, I plan to discuss, why do I want to do it, and underneath you can see now the final, sorry for my voice, I still haven't recovered from my condition that I had over the month of July. We have the complete statement of the question. Now there are a few things that I need to show you which are important. For example, and you may probably miss. First of all, why am I talking about strategies that typically are recognized as enabling school principals to enhance, to take positive steps and so on? I'm talking about strategies because you will be looking into literature. The student who asks this question certainly is not in the position, because of ethics committee at our university, is not in the position to go outside, do surveys and make a big study out of it. So I have focused already in here, in this first statement of the research question, I have focused the student's project on the kinds of strategies that he will find or she will find in literature that are recognized as linking good management style or good management strategies with enhancement of learning and teaching in a particular school. Right, so that's very important. Another thing I have here is I didn't talk about leadership qualities because it's qualities don't tell us anything. What we need to do is to look at particular strategies that the principal is using. And then, as you read the final statement of the proposal, you will see that the paragraph ends with a statement to the effect that after the student identifies the kinds of things that literature says, now student needs to actually assess what literature says against the pedagogic framework that the student has. This is important because unless you do that, you uncritically repeat what other people say. Consequently, me as a lecturer, I cannot actually make judgment whether you understand what you have written. Right? So now you can see why I stress the concept of the intellectual framework or pedagogic framework. It is important to have one in order now to look at what literature says and now tell your perspective. And here I basically repeat to you what I just have said. Now, these are very general statements that I want you to actually read because they tell us about what research does. Research does not describe reality. Research makes statements about reality. In order for these statements to be understood by any other researcher or teacher, you have to actually tell us the principles in terms of which you created or constructed your research. This is why an intellectual framework is important. Without these principles, your statements about the reality that you are describing are meaningless to you and to anybody else who reads it. Right? So in order to be understood, you have to tell us the framework within which you created your study. Otherwise, nobody knows what you're talking about. These principles I've taken from a video on quantum physics, whether it's quantum physics, biology, or social sciences. Particular things we do have in common. And here is a couple of statements. And if you ever have time, you can watch Professor Zeilinger. He's actually German, actually making his speech on quantum physics. Quite interesting. So here's the slide where I actually worded the challenge of your research project. So once you actually identify what literature says, then you have to assess whether what literature says has any correlation to the principles that you believe pedagogy, good teaching and learning is about. I want to spend time on this slide here because some of you might find the way I talk about my pedagogic framework a little bit different than you've seen until so far. Why do I stress the point that education is expansive? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? But it needs to be said. It needs to be said, and I'll explain shortly why. But in my lectures with our internal on-campus students, I compare education to socialization. What does socialization do? It actually reduces your frames of reference. So for example, it doesn't matter where the child is born. If I take it to Poland and I raise it in Poland, it is very likely that it will speak Polish. But until 18 months, until a child is 18 months old, you may not know, a child can distinguish any sound on the planet that human languages produce. Any sound. But as from 18 months onwards, children lose this discrimination capacity. It is their socialization. It is their social interactions that start working on their brain and teaching them to distinguish between what's relevant and hold on to it and what's irrelevant, the things that they have to actually ignore. So socialization largely creates a situation where the elements that we process, we actually make selections and we actually reduce our capacities. What education does, education now challenges us and says, look, there is more. You don't only have to speak Polish, you can speak English.
You don't only have to value this thing, you can value other things. So that's the role of education. Education is now to create exploratory conditions for students to compare, contrast, and to contest the kinds of values that they hold. Not necessarily values, but they need to actually explore the kinds of beliefs that make them hold these values in order to now make informed decisions about expanding those. So if education is expensive in terms of diversity, we don't actually give students what they want to do. Some of our students in different schools may not actually want to do the things that children or adults do in Australia in English. It is our role now that as we introduce tasks to students, we play with them. We create exploratory conditions that allow students to see why people do what they do in Australia, so that students will get excited, will actually see the purpose of expanding their beliefs in terms of what they value about reality and start wanting to do more things. The same with values. Inclusivity. Our students come to our environments, learning environments with particular values. But now what I want is our teachers to challenge themselves and think how they can create exploratory conditions for their students so that their students can actually look critically at their beliefs, at their values, or at the beliefs that inform their values, and all of a sudden may actually see things from different perspective. That's what education does. Now, when it comes to learner-centeredness, I am fully aware that different textbooks produce different definitions of learner-centeredness. I'm going here with a concept that is very important to technology, and that is that students process information differently. It doesn't matter whether we're both Polish or Filipino or we come from the same country or from the same family, because we have our own individual histories. We will approach we have different circuits in our brains, different connections that we utilize. Consequently, there is no single student who will process information, or we may not know it for sure, but let's assume it, that there is no single student that will process information the same way as any other student. So what we need to do now is not to give students English and hope that they will be processing it like English people do, because they will not. If they don't speak English, they will process English as Filipino people do, or as Polish people do, or as Germans do. So what we need to do in order to account for the expansive aspect of education in relation to the concern with learner-centeredness, we now need to think what activities we can create that help students challenge the ways in which they process information, expand, do other things, and all of a sudden look at English or feel English differently than they were when they were only applying their first language strategies. Right? So now when you will be looking at this particular student who is doing this project, when the student will be comparing what literature says against his own or this particular framework, pedagogic framework, what the student will be saying is as follows. Okay, if literature links those management strategies with positive, good teaching and learning outcomes, how are they, how is it what literature says now helps me to see that they indeed are very good strategies, because they indeed push teachers towards reflecting about how to create expansive learning environments, and expansive learning environments in terms that challenge what students believe they will be doing in future life, what students actually value, and how students process information, so that teachers are professionally engaged in a continuous reflection about how to support students in challenging what they are and moving them forward. And moving them forward means helping them to create more terms in relation to which they actually can assess what's happening around them, be it English or any other language.